If you have the right mindset, the tools can actually help you learn. If you have a different mindset, the tools can be a substitute for learning.
At some point, the outcomes from the models are just going to completely collapse and they're going to be actually wrong.
The benefit of AI is to more quickly dispatch with the low value work so I can spend more time thinking, more time learning. Good morning, Peter.
Hey, good morning, David. How are you?
I'm great, and welcome back again to Call Me Data.
Yes, another episode of Call Me Data.
That's right.
And yet another, wait, I have to comment because I haven't commented on your shirts in quite some time, but this is a new one, isn't it?
Believe it or not, I'm recycling, but I can't believe that this didn't make a lasting impression on you, right? How could you forget?
I do. I vote for we're going to allocate some budget money every year to you having new shirts, though.
Maybe your eyes are trying to protect themselves by trying to forget the loudness of this particular shirt. But
can you tell my shirt's different? I mean, come on.
It is. It's a different color. I don't think I've ever seen you in olive green. Is that what it is?
Yeah, actually, it's coming through okay. Yeah, it's actually pretty good.
Yeah.
I didn't think it would even come through at all.
This is apparently, when I got this, it's apparently like a heritage design, like some authentic 1950s design of Aloha shirt. So I kind of liked it. Feeling very retro today.
I honestly think we should do a whole podcast on the history of Aloha shirts.
I would have to do some research, but that would be fun research. And I think that, honestly, if we're going to do that, Peter, the only way to do it appropriately would be for us to go on site to some of the handful of remaining factories in Hawaii where the Aloha shirts are actually still made.
I'm sorry. I'd have to twist my arm for that one. I don't know if I could. Hard decision to make there.
So we need to ask the producers if we have budget for the whole crew to go to Hawaii for an upcoming episode. I think that sounds like a great idea.
I am 100% behind that idea. You know that.
I love when you come up with these amazing ideas.
Occasionally, I get these little bouts of intelligence that just shut the show up.
All right. So you can look forward to us coming live from Hawaii sometime in the maybe not so near future. Well, listen, we have I know I always say we have an interesting topic because I always love the topics we talk about, but you found an article and it really got me thinking, and it's a fascinating topic. So let's jump into it. Do you want to tee up the topic?
Yeah, let me tee it up, and it's just a little backstory. You and I always try to look for, I think, interesting, provocative topics that are germane to what's going on in the world today. And look, we're awash in information about artificial intelligence, and quite honestly, I think so much of it is just, I call them AI influencers. So we try to go for the deeper topics that we feel are really going to have value and educate our listeners here. So one of the things, during our research for this week's podcast, I came across an article which I thought was fascinating and very, I think personally, very true. And it's something that, we have tangentially probably spoken about a bit, and the impact of AI on education and intelligence. And the topic was, or I should say that the title of the article was AI Choke Off the Supply of Knowledge. It was a Wall Street Journal article by a writer who I generally read all the time and respect his work. I think it's very good. But he had an interesting series of points, which I thought was absolutely fascinating and warranted certainly a discussion on the topic. And, and I guess just to sum it up and tee it up a little bit more, it is, will ultimately AI choke off the supply of knowledge? Yes, it makes us significantly more efficient, but it also, in many cases, makes us much more lazy to actually think. And I think that's really the crux of the issue here.
So I can't wait to examine this in more detail. First, let me get a little bit meta on you, which is I think sometimes our most enjoyable conversations are not when we're talking purely about technology, right? We spend our day working with AI at, I'll call it at a technical level. But I also feel like sometimes the value in these conversations is anyone can go and get technical insight about AI. As you said, there are hundreds and hundreds of articles every day being published. A percentage of them are actually good and worth reading. Many of them are fluff, but there's still lots out there. There's research papers. Technical knowledge about AI is not terribly hard to come by. What I feel like is maybe a little bit more challenging to find is just good insight into what it all means in terms of impact on individual people and how we work and how we think, impact on our companies, impact on society. Um, and I'm not going to claim we have the answers, but like we've been around a while. We like to think about this stuff. I guess I'm becoming like an amateur self-styled AI philosopher, which sounds so pretentious when I say it out loud.
And it comes with age and wisdom, or at least a attempt at wisdom.
Well, so I've nailed one of those two. I've got the age thing down pat.
Yeah, I'm with you.
I'm definitely aging, and I've figured out how to do it. Still working on the wisdom, but
It'll come eventually for both.
one step
Eventually,
at a
both of us.
time. Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely a it comes slowly. Let's say that.
Yeah. One of my favorite veiled insults was always, uh, he has the wisdom of youth and the energy of old age.
It is funny. As the older you get, the more less you realize you have less wisdom than you thought you had when you were much younger, when you had an overabundance of confidence in your knowledge.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. So all of that to say, we don't think we know it all. We might know a little, we might not. Depends on the day.
Right.
But
But
this topic really did get me thinking. Now,
mhm.
stepping back off the soapbox about, yeah, what's the impact on the whole body of human knowledge and on our ability to think? And we've talked about this before. So
No, we most definitely have, and there are certainly, I think, broader implications on this, and it warrants deeper discussion and certainly an awareness that it's potential for happening. Certainly in any kind of organization. You and I have been through, and I think we're still learning the impact of the artificial intelligence just on human nature in general, how organizations are going to adjust and work, and how it's going to affect their operations and their people and everything else. And we're only at the very beginning of a long cycle. Like we're
yeah,
still seeing impacts of cell phones on people, and the cell phones have been around for decades. And the
that
same for the internet.
yeah.
It just takes a long time for some of these things to work through. Um,
That's actually a great point. I mean, this year in New York State for this school year that started this week is the first time that the governor has ordered I think they're calling it the bell-to-bell cell phone ban, which is saying that classrooms across the state are, you know, supposed to be forbidding students having their cell phones out. And, you know, smartphones have been around since I think 2007 was the launch of the first iPhone. So we've been,
yeah.
we're getting close to 20 years, like 18 years of iPhones, and we still don't fully understand the impact that they have on people. So it's going to be a long time before anyone has a definitive answer on AI. But before I ask you if you agree with the article, sum up for us the premise. Like, what is the argument that they're making, or the questions they're raising in the article?
Well, the questions are, well, they're raising a bunch of questions. I think the main question is, it just can sum it up quite succinctly, is are we really getting lazy? Are we not creating knowledge anymore because we're relying on these extremely powerful tools to answer questions for us? Whereas in the past, we would have done a lot of research, and the internet made, doing research a lot easier. You can look at, tons of links and sites and sources very quickly. Now it's summarizing all that for us and giving us the answer. So we're never really generating our own knowledge anymore. We're just kind of relying on an LM to summarize it and tell us the output. And
Yeah.
LLMs don't necessarily create new knowledge. There is some of the knowledge that they were trained with.
So I think that's a really interesting point that LLMs, as you just said, they're synthesizing and aggregating existing knowledge. And I think the premise is that humans, when they're doing research, we have an incentive to do something different. We historically, at least, we value ingenuity and novel ideas, right? So humans are like, there's always going to be places where humans just do research, and fair enough. And I guess you could argue that doing straight research isn't adding to the body of human knowledge. But have been a lot of situations in which a researcher is just looking for that, I don't know, that out there idea, that different idea. You hear all the time of people trying to solve these unsolvable problems or pondering the imponderables. And I guess sometimes that's the spark of human creativity that we're like struggling to make sense of something, and we're trying to piece together these unlikely connections that have never been made before between different ideas or different topics. Is that sort of the thing that we're talking about here?
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's 100% what we're talking about. But I want to be careful too, because you and I have also taken um, the view that these tools can be used to enhance creativity. So I think you have to be aware, I think, of the full spectrum of the ways to use the tools and how you use them, and you have to be cognizant of how you use them. And I think one of the points of the article was the disappearance of incentives. Are we disincentivizing humans from doing that extra thinking on their own because now we have this tool that just outputs something for us? And there's other downstream impacts to that as well. So, but are they? I mean, are they disincentivizing us from actually doing the hard work because they make it so easy for us now? I don't know. What do you think, David? I mean, there's a lot of body of knowledge out there that seems to suggest that we are being disincentivized from doing original work now because of these tools.
Yeah. So first of all, there is a lot of that research out there, and again, it's very early stage research. You and I've talked before about the MIT study that came out that said that basically people who are heavily using LLMs are activating less different areas of their brain around executive functioning and reasoning.
Right.
And the fear, unproven, but the fear is, does that mean that those parts of the brain effectively like atrophy and get weaker? So,
Mhm.
but I go back to like cell phones. Let's use cell phones again as an example. I don't think there's a clear single answer, because I could certainly say, you know what, cell phone culture is terrible. These kids today, they Snapchat each other and DM each other and text each other, and they never actually pick up the phone and speak, let alone go out and meet with each other in person, right? We've talked about that before. Like kids
Always, many
sometimes
times.
come home and sit in front of their computers or their devices and interact with
Mhm.
their friends instead of
Right.
whatever we did as kids, running around the neighborhood and, you know, being in one place physically. Clearly that's a problem. But the flip side of that is I also know that kids today, and I'm saying kids like I sound like an old man when I'm like kids today, but like people today of all generations are also using these devices to stay in touch with people that they otherwise would never stay in touch with. I talk all the time to people who are like, "Oh yeah, that person that I
Right.
met once 3 years ago, we still speak every week because we keep each other up to date. We send texts back and
Right.
forth, etc." And I didn't grow up with that technology, and I have lost touch with a lot of people over my life that I think if I'd been
Mhm.
if I'd met them in an era when we had smartphones, we would probably still be interacting regularly. So
Probably, yes.
so it's really hard for me to say with cell phones if it's a net positive or a net negative in terms of how it connects people. I see both sides.
Well,
And
I think there
I feel the same way about LLMs.
Well, I think it's the same thing with any technology. I mean, look, at the end of the day, it's never all bad or all good. There's always going to be it's someplace on the spectrum of, you have to be smart about how you use these powerful tools. And then he takes a position. Obviously, it's a position, right or wrong. I think he's suggesting he's got a, he was pretty objective about it. Um, it's how you ultimately use them. And like, you and I use them. It's not like we sit there and just take the output and plop it into a document. We go back and forth. We use it. We enhance it with our knowledge. We make a lot change. Yes, it makes us more efficient, but we're significantly enhancing it with our experience and our knowledge. We're not just taking what it's telling us and spitting it out to everybody else. And I think that's really kind of the crux of the issue. Many people are just cognitively lazy and humanly lazy. I think most people are. Just the nature because we're pressed for time that you take what they have and are not really doing necessary thinking. And this goes back to something you and I said a million times: the death of critical thinking skills.
Yeah, yeah, and I definitely want to come back to that critical thinking idea. Um, but I agree with what you just said. It is at the end of the day, all tools are in the same category for me, which is very few tools are inherently evil or good. It's
Right.
how they're used by humans. And I mean, a hammer can build a house, or a hammer can be a weapon, and you could say that
Exactly.
about virtually any tool out there. So um, but let's also take a look. I mean, the part that really got me thinking about this is the idea that there is sometimes you just want the answer. As you just said, people are pressed for
Right.
time and they want the answer. And when you want the quick answer, AI tools are invaluable. And And I believe that they will many times give you the exact same answer that you would get through hours and hours of web searching and reading and researching. So I don't see in that situation there's not really much of a downside. You're saving a lot of time. But sometimes isn't the value not in the answer, but in I was going to sound corny. I'm going to say in the journey, in the
I was just going to say in the journey.
right, the dialogue, the discussion, the debate, the back and forth. Like, I don't know. Do you think that's
No,
sometimes more
I
valuable than the final answer?
I completely agree with you, actually. I think there are times when that journey, just going through and looking through all this. And look, there are plenty of times that you do generate a novel insight that didn't exist before. And I think it still keeps your brain in. Look, when you use your brain effectively or use your brain in a situation like that, you're keeping your brain sharp, which I think is very important, as opposed to just being summarized. Here's a list of, here's your summary, Peter. When you actually go out and think and go through the journey. And it is, to me, the joy has always been in the journey of learning. It's having all this knowledge. It's putting it all together. It's keeping my brain sharp. It's being able to, pull facts from my head from 30 years ago and, layer it into whatever I'm looking at now. And just, querying something and saying, I need to understand this better. And they use an example about Einstein in the article is I feel like I'm shortcutting it sometimes. And there are times that going through the process is really, really helpful. And I like doing it.
Yeah. And it's not even, it's in addition to it being helpful and enlightening. I think the other part is sometimes you get a different answer. Like I'm sure you can think of examples where you might read a summary of the research and come to conclusion X. But if you're going through a debate, a dialogue, you're reading conflicting opinions that are very unsettled and you're going back and forth, you might choose a different outcome. Like I've seen situations which I ask for advice, I get lots of input, and I actually ignore the advice because hearing the reasoning people give, hearing the debate gets me thinking differently or maybe more clearly about what I'm trying to solve. And I might, at the end of that, actually defy the conventional wisdom and say, well, okay, I get why everyone, 80% of you say X is the reason, but I like Y. I'm going with Y. Maybe it's the contrarian in me, but that, so that's an example to me of where the process, the journey might lead you to pick a different answer than the evidence objectively would suggest.
No, 100%. And I think, look, and especially the topic that you're researching, if it's a very new topic, it's something that has highly relevant information. It's really new, and can be included in a model anyway. It's making decisions based on potentially older information, which is, obviously, let's remember what models are. They're basically these statistical animals that have been trained with a massive corpus of information. They can tell you the most, whatever. It's going to give you an output based on statistics at the end of the day. And that's just not necessarily right.
Yeah, if I think it comes back to maybe the difference between researching and thinking, right? As a tool for research, where your goal, I mean, I'm going to say like I'm going to use a definition of research that is, I just want to understand and summarize and know what has already been said, written, or done on a topic versus thinking where I want to go deep and think about it. As a tool for research, AI is great. As a tool for thinking, it can be great or it can be a lazy shortcut.
Well, I think you have to use it properly. It goes back to everything else. It's a tool, and a fool with a tool is still a fool unless they use it the right way. And I think if we use it to help germinate new ideas or put things together in a way maybe you didn't think about before and takes you down a different path, which creates new knowledge, they're highly effective. And I think this is important for a whole, bunch of issues out there. Like if an organization is using these tools, you want that. Look, organizations need to generate new information. They have to be aware that this is a potential output from them. If all they're doing is taking their existing corpus of information internally and summarizing it, they're not effectively growing at the end of the day. They're not adding any new knowledge to their corpus of information. And that's a real problem. And that was one of what the articles pointed out
Yeah.
in terms of the reduction of creation of real new knowledge.
Well, right. Absolutely. And also what you just described sounds a little bit like the social media bubbles that we see happening too, right? Where
Yes.
people are fed a diet of self-reinforcing information based on
Yep.
the beliefs that they've already said they have.
Right.
And they never get contradictory information. They never see the other side. And, look, I used to I'm going to go off on a little bit of a tangent here, but I used to think very poorly of people who went down the rabbit hole, as it were, and fell for conspiracy theories. I
Right.
just thought there was something wrong with them personally, that they were just intellectually lazy. I I'm changing that opinion because the more I learn about how easy it is for people to be fed a steady diet of information that only reinforces a viewpoint they might have already sort of said they have but not fully believed in, like, that's a challenge.
That's challenge.
Yeah, and I see in a way how the same thing is, not as nefarious, but your example is how LLMs can sort of do the same thing. Like, they're going to give you the information that is statistically most relevant in the world, or most prevalent in the world. They're not going to give you the low percentage fringe ideas.
So interesting that you brought up what you brought up regarding the steady stream of self-reinforcing knowledge, or the not, you kept this diet of reinforcing your view. Because I think it was the Soviets did a study on propaganda years ago, many many years ago. I want to say it was back in the '60s, and they put individuals and they fed them a steady stream of information that was it was patently false. Everybody knew it was false, but they were fed the same information for a period. I think it was, I want to say from between 2 and 4 weeks straight.
Ooh, interesting.
And it was a surprisingly short period of time. After that, shown any contradictory evidence to what they were told for the past couple of weeks, they deemed it was false, even though it was 100% accurate. So it was as if
Wow.
the sky's blue, the sky's blue, the sky's blue, and then you tell them something they were going to believe. They'll believe whatever was told to them, and it was hard to get them off of that. And it was they understood that when you see this in totalitarian societies all the time. When you're fed a steady stream of information, you latch on to it and you believe it. You check your brain. You don't think. You don't use that critical thinking skills to question what you're being told. And look, and this is told in many books. What is Aldous Huxley, and some of the books that we read probably in high school and grammar school. Brave New World, where you're fed a steady stream of propaganda. But what struck me more than anything was the limited duration of being told something. So yes, back to your point about being in an organization and you're basically being reinforced over and over and over again if you're just never really thinking.
The human brain is weird, man.
Well, absolutely. And
Yeah.
yes, and you got to go back to how the human brain actually functions to circumvent some of these shortcomings of the human brain.
So the other one I was just thinking of, here's an interesting thought experiment for you. What do you think? So, I mentioned those fringe ideas that often are given low probability and therefore low ranking and low importance by AI models, right? But sometimes those fringe ideas are actually the right ones, or are the better ones, which
Absolutely.
got me thinking, like, what thought experiment for you? What would have happened if we'd had a large language model back in the days of Christopher Columbus? Now,
Hmm.
bear with me. Let's pretend, for the sake of this thought experiment,
I love
let's pretend that
these.
we all agree Christopher Columbus actually discovered North America. I know that many, many other cultures are thought to have discovered North America
Start
before
right
him.
before him, I know.
Yep, but let's pretend it's Christopher Columbus just for this
Right.
example. So if we'd had an LLM in the days when Christopher Columbus was alive, and the general consensus in the world and most written documents were supporting the idea that we had a flat Earth, and Christopher Columbus was going to sail off the edge of the Earth and fall
Hmm.
through space perpetually, or whatever was going to
Right.
happen, LLMs would have told people, I think, tell me if you agree. I think LLMs would have pretty much definitively told people, yes, the Earth is flat, right?
100%,
Because
of course.
the low probability, the low ranking opinions would have been the few lunatics out there who said, no,
Yeah.
maybe the world is round. But
Yeah.
the vast
Yes.
majority of what was written and believed would have been, oh, the world is flat, man. And an LLM would
Absolutely.
have confidently told you, yes, the world is flat.
110%, or Copernicus, and the Earth is the center of the solar system and all that.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yes, we would have told because it was the prominent thinking back then, and the French thinking, which was accurate, was certainly not out there. In fact, it was suppressed, so it never would have made it never would have made it into a 14th century LLM.
That's pretty wild. Pretty wild to think.
Yes.
That's a good. So
Exactly because
I think I'm going to rewrite a Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's court as like, an AI researcher in Christopher Columbus's era. I don't know. I have to think about that. Might make an interesting play.
it
Um,
would be actually interesting if an LM today and you could say, "Hey, I want knowledge up into a certain point in time. So only give me knowledge up into the 15th century that you've been trained on, up into the 16th century. Kind of work your way through
ooh,
time and see how it changes. How wild
oh,
would that be?"
we have to create the world's first Renaissance chatbot, right? That has
Yes.
a cutoff date of Renaissance era knowledge, and it would be so interesting to see
Yep.
what it would say about like medicine, right? Would be a fascinating one,
It'd be
right? Like
fascinating,
this
actually. Of course.
chatbot would be telling you to go get the leeches to cure your headache.
Yes. Talking about the Black Plague or whatever, put the big thing on your face with the garlic in it and all that other fun stuff.
Yeah,
But now it would be fascinating to get a perspective of the world. It was only trained with the information we had at that point in time.
I have to take the day off. I've got a case of the vapors coming on. I just, yeah, yeah. All right. So the Renaissance chatbot will be coming. Look for it soon at in a app store near you. Um,
It's a good idea for a company. Should get funding on that one. Uh,
yeah. Hey,
so
why not?
why
But
not?
you also said something really interesting, going back to like the massive corpus of data that these models are trained on, and following on from this whole idea of the model will be only as good as the ranking that it assigns to an idea, a concept, a fact,
Right.
etc., which is statistically determined, right? I mean, yes, we know there's a little bit of randomness in picking which of the final ranked results come next when you adjust things like temperature in a model, but that's you're not changing the fundamental way the model works. You're just tweaking the final step in prediction of the
Exactly.
next word or the next token. So you're not going to get very different answers. You're going to get slightly different answers.
Right.
Um, Relate that for me to the whole concept of model collapse, because I think that this whole topic brings model collapse back to the foreground, and it's a concern that people have started raising already. So let's start by explaining what model collapse means, if people haven't heard that term.
I mean, fundamentally, it's just the models get worse in their response. They get less and less accurate over time. And model collapse isn't a new thing. It's not something that's just germane to language models or generative AI. Model collapse has been around for eons. It comes out from traditional analytics and traditional statistics when at some point the models just become, the response is basically collapsed. The information that you get, the output that you get is just completely wrong.
Yeah, and it's in the LLM context. I think the concern is that as more, so models are trained, as you said very accurately, models are trained on the content that they scrape from every possible source they can get. Over time, the theory is, what if more and more of that content is model generated? And now models are being trained on information generated by models, right? And it becomes this very self-referential loop, a doom loop,
Exactly. Yes,
right?
exactly.
Does the quality go down? Like what if, today we have, I don't know, 99.9% of the content that models are trained on is human generated, and 0.1% is, I'm making up these numbers obviously, but what if we get to the point where 30, 40, 50% of the content that is available to train a model is actually derived from a model
Oh, we're
and
past that
not from
already.
humans?
The number I saw was 2028, I think it was, that they will have consumed all knowing, I'm sorry, every bit of human created content will be incorporated into a model. I think it was by 2028. It was a lot closer than you think. And I think the
So
issue now
after
is
that, the percentage of human content trained on a model will go down. It has to go down because it'll be more machine generated content used for training.
right, 110%. That's exactly what's going to happen. So, and even today, you're seeing the vast majority of the content that's generated on the internet is not generated by humans. It's generated by machines. So you're already in that information. So, for instance, Wikipedia or Substack or any of these or any of these websites where there's a lot of human responses or human generated content. Now it's all being generated by machines. So hence it's not original. Hence it's generated over what's already there. You're now going to use that to train the model even further. At some point, the outcomes from the models are just going to completely collapse and they're going to be actually wrong. Who knows what will actually come out of it? Maybe be gibberish. I don't know, but they will stop to respond accurately. they'll stop
Yeah.
responding well.
So this model collapse, I want to pick up on something else you just mentioned too. But model collapse is, I think, is a real threat,
It's
and
a real issue.
it sort of reminds me of like the mythical Ouroboros, which is the snake eating its own tail. You've seen
Yes.
in a whole bunch of places, and there's a bunch of different interpretations of that, like some very positive and some a mix of positive and negative. Like the one that fits for me is this idea of, they call it the unity of opposites, right? The snake is simultaneously feeding itself but destroying itself, and I sort of see that like happening with AI, except the difference is the mythological state snake, that's a steady state, right? They're talking about this, it's a natural cycle. The snake is perpetually consuming itself and nourishing itself, and it just keeps doing that. Whereas I think what we're talking about with model collapse is this is not a sustainable model. Like if this really reaches a tipping point, the quality will just go down, 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 unless we somehow continue to create lots of innovative human thought, and B, make sure that that innovative human thought is more heavily weighted in these models than AI slop.
So you bring up two, I think, incredibly valid points, which we can refine separately. One, how do we incentivize humans to create original content? And then the second one is, which was your first point, is how do we train models with only original human content when you can't even discern the difference today?
Goes back to, we talked about AI labeling a couple of times, right? And like I think I was generally taking we don't really need AI labeling because it creates a meaningless division between
Mhm.
what's AI content, what's not, right? It's a challenge. Like I still don't love the idea of AI labeling because it's too binary, right? Like,
It is. I agree.
but right, if I use AI for 1% of something I create, do I have to label it, right? But if you're not doing some form of labeling, how would you prioritize human generated content over machine generated?
I don't know. I don't know. Or do you make sure? I know you're a valid point. I mean, but how do you incentivize people to create original content and not rely on models all the time? And it's a conundrum because they are so efficient at creating content and making your life easier. So all of a sudden, it's like, no, you got to go back to what you were doing before and actually use your brain and think.
So what you're effectively saying, and I think I agree with this, is it's not about making the tool foolproof. It's about making the fools that use the tools less foolish, right? It's about making us smarter users of these tools.
It goes back to education, something you and
Yeah,
I have been saying for I don't know 2 years probably.
right.
Always goes
Going
back
back
to
to my hammer
education.
example, like
Yes,
we've had hammers for thousands of years. No one is talking, as far as I know, no one is spending a lot of time trying to develop a hammer that's incapable of hitting your thumb. What we do is we teach people how to use a hammer, right?
I agree. But see, it's we can riff on education for a long time. I
Yeah.
agree.
Yeah.
I think you and I align on all of this, but the overall quality of education has gone down dramatically. And now you're introducing some uber powerful tools that will make students in many cases quite lazy because why do the work when I can simply get the answer, right, wrong, or otherwise, and I don't have to think. Which I think also, and again, back to some of what we're saying, does that also cause? And we touched on it earlier. The brain, certain parts of the brain to atrophy from lack of use. And they have seen this in our geospatial capabilities because of online maps.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's not that it's not a possibility, it's a very real possibility of happening.
And we think of that as bad, right? My first reaction is, oh, that's terrible. But like, maybe that's just evolution, maybe, right? Because we've also lost, we don't have claws. We don't have sharp teeth to like, we've evolved as humans, and some of that evolution has made us better suited for the world in which we live, but less suited for the world in which we used to live, right? Like, there's a trade-off in all of this.
I agree, but do we really want to lose the capabilities of the one thing that differentiates us from every other species on the planet, which is our brain?
Fair question. I think that,
Hey, for
yeah.
some people, it's probably no different. I mean,
So,
I don't.
so
I would like to use these tools to enhance our knowledge and make our brains more powerful, and not just because we're punting thinking to a machine, but because our brains actually get smarter and we increase our cognitive capabilities. And maybe this is the cudgel we need to do that.
well, so it's a great point. And I think back to your point about like it's all how you use these tools, and maybe that also has an impact on how our brains develop, right? I think the happy path in all this, the terrible path, the gloom and doom version is we continue to get lazier and we use AI to do everything and our brains atrophy and things go downhill. I think the happy path is, if we explore that, is that
Right.
maybe it frees up more bandwidth for us to do the real value added research. So today, if I want to do research on a topic, I have
Mm-hmm.
to spend 30 years, or some number, right? I may have to spend decades learning what's already known before I can take the first step into the unknown. I have to study physics, astronomy, economics, whatever it is I have to study. I've got to catch up on the body of human knowledge before I can have an original thought, right? Like those original thoughts
Yes.
don't come I mean, yeah, movies like to have the idea of like the neophyte who just out of nowhere comes up with a groundbreaking idea, but that's not the way most progress works. Most progress is scientists and scholars spend decades studying what's already known, synthesizing knowledge, and then they begin to take steps into the unknown. So I guess the question is, could AI shortcut that first part? Could I, with the benefit of AI, spend 5 years learning what would maybe have taken me 25 years to learn? And therefore, could I be more quickly at the step of starting to really have original thought in a field if I were a researcher? I don't know.
I don't
What do
know.
you think? Is that
I
possible?
don't know. It's funny because as you're speaking, I'm going back and forth in my head both ways. I don't know. I'm not sure where I land on this one. I tend to think, and again, gut, nothing based on pure gut, that experience still matters and that you can't really short circuit in some cases. Um, I mean, maybe you could short circuit a little bit, but you can't short circuit making breakthroughs in really complex fields. I think there's just something that comes with the experience of learning. Now, can these tools help you learn? Absolutely. And maybe will that make it go faster? Maybe make you think. Maybe. I don't know. I don't know if it's going to cut it. That I don't. I honestly don't know. I can see both sides though. I can see how having access to, but even then, it's like knowledge gives you the ability many times, or experience gives you the ability to know what questions to actually ask. And that just comes with time. You can only go so fast. So I might have a powerful tool that is Einstein level capabilities in physics. That doesn't make me Einstein. It just
Right.
makes me
Right.
still a fool with a tool that has Einstein as my
Yeah.
partner. Doesn't mean I
That
understand what he's
that's
saying.
fair.
I don't know.
But I see this, and I purposely picked like the extreme case of like cutting three-quarters of the time off what it takes to be an expert in a field. But like I see that in real life every day with the way we use these tools, right? Which is that you can use AI to do some of the, I'll call it the drudgery research on a topic so that you can get more quickly to the point where you're having original thoughts about it, right? So there is some acceleration there, I
There
think.
is, but because I'm already an expert in my field, I can look at the results and very quickly put it together really fast. Now, if I was an expert in the field of, technology engineering, I don't know if I would get that benefit out of it. It's the same thing as, giving that same tool to somebody who has, 25 years less experience than us, and could they come to the same answers and conclusions that we come to? And I don't think the answer is yes to that. And
Yeah.
the reason I see this in younger engineers who are trying to develop systems and learning, and the questions that they're asking tend to be very basic questions that you happen to come to experience,
Right.
but they don't have that background. Now, can they learn
Interesting.
that a lot faster and iterate over those questions? Absolutely, 110%. But you
Interesting.
know,
So do you think, I mean, and this is something that the author of the article in question also raises, which is, do you think we still have economic and social incentives for people to do novel work? Because I see a lot of, you look at the AI influencers or you look at the entire influencer culture in general, and it's not novel. It's derivative. It's massively
yes,
derivative work. Do we still have, as a society, the social and the economic incentives that make people actually want to break new ground and do novel work and develop new theories and solve new problems?
Um,
It's a bit of an
I,
existential question early in the morning.
yeah, it is, and I want to say the answer is yes. I don't know. I feel like so many people or so many, you have, again, you go back to, you have a tool that's incredibly powerful. You inherently get like even we have to sometimes, although I have to double check and say, no, I can't accept what I've been told. I have to ask the right questions. I have to dive deeper. I have to spend the time. And I think that needs to be re-injected into society, that there is a lot of value on creating new information,
Right.
and that you can't just accept what you've been told. I don't know if that's going to, there's going to be a subset of people that will, I think, inherently just go create new stuff because they have the passion behind it. I don't know if it's ever going to change. I don't know. You're asking a good, I don't know. I'm all over the place on your response, but probably
I
because I don't have a clear thought on it yet.
I love the one thing you just said about a subset of people who have that passion. So I don't have the answer to that question either. But here's what I was thinking about earlier today, which is that maybe the big differentiator in humans in the future is not going to be so historically we as a Western society especially we have ascribed, but this is by no means only Western, right? um, we've ascribed success to hustle, to effort, right? And the American dream, you work hard and you will make it. And right. So that's been for decades, if not centuries, it's been, this idea that hard work has its rewards. And again, it's a Puritan idea from the,
Yeah.
early American
Right.
historical era. But um I think, we all know that's not the only way to be successful. We've all seen examples of this, but like maybe we are shifting to the idea that success will be the biggest differentiator for success will not be effort or hustle. What if it's what I'm going to call intellectual curiosity? What if it's the love of learning? So for people who don't love learning, who don't want to go through the process of discovering and learning something new for themselves, they can use AI. They're going to have access to all the information they ever need to move through the world with AI, and they don't have to truly create something new. But will there be a group of people who are the creators, who are the innovators, who really love learning for the sake of discovery? And maybe they will be the ones who use these tools differently and ultimately achieve success in the future.
I think there's always going to be, again, go back, there's always a subset of society that wants to do something new, novel, different, discover, whatever it may be. The discoverers of age old, hopped onto a boat and traveled halfway across the world not knowing where they're going. And even today, there's always those that want to do something radically different than everybody else. Let's go to Mars. Whatever it may be. There's always going to be those that are deeply intellectually curious, who aren't satisfied with the status quo or reading from a book or just spewing output that they've learned. They want to do something that is different, put their mark on society and do something dramatic. That will always be a subset. I think where we can, if we're smart, if we're aware, we can use these tools in ways that enhance that, make it go faster, or whatever it may be. That, I think, to me, is you got to be cognizant. If you use the tools the right way, the process can get, I think, I'd say easier, but enhanced. If I'm making
Yeah.
myself clear here, which I'm
Yeah.
trying to, it's I'm working through the thoughts I'm editing, trying to speak about some of this stuff. And
No, that makes total sense. And I think that's what I was trying to get to earlier too. Is if you have the right mindset, the tools can actually help you learn. If you have a different mindset, the tools can be a substitute for learning.
now I want to tie this back to organizations real quick, because I think it's a real important lesson for organizations to latch on to, because I think most have been enamored with the thought that, one, going to save money, two, become more efficient. Most are still using it at the periphery. They're not really using the tools. But I think the critical thing for me is they have to be aware, deeply aware, that they cannot lose their ability to think, and that if
Yes.
they lose their ability to think, they're going to be somebody else's lunch meat. And it's just a matter of time. If you just, all you're doing is taking your existing knowledge and replaying it or rehashing it or doing whatever you're doing or summarizing it, not out there creating new innovative products or tools or, pharmaceuticals or whatever it may be. But you have to be cognizant and aware to keep doing that. You can't take the easy path. There is no easy path for a lot of these things.
No, that's right. And we measure the wrong things. sometimes, right? We don't have a good way to measure thinking. And this also goes back to education, which you referenced earlier in this conversation, right? We I'm convinced that as our AI tools become more and more able to do the drudgery part of what our brains do today, we need to make sure that we are teaching people how to learn and how to think. We need to be teaching things like scientific method and rationality and research skills. We need to foster people's creativity. Like, there is a joy in learning that people forget about. One of my favorite genres of books to read recently, I've just read 3 or 4 in the last couple of months, is about turn of the century explorers traversing the Antarctic. And there were all of these missions in, especially in some of the years right after World War One, or even before World War One, early 1900s. There were lots of missions launched to map and explore the Antarctic continent. People
Yeah,
went through extreme danger and suffering and duress because they believed that it was important to know what was there,
right.
right? So we have to keep that spirit of adventure and thirst to actually learn things alive. And the problem is, just like in corporate organizations, it's hard to measure that. In education, what do we measure? Well, unfortunately, we measure retained knowledge, because measuring retained knowledge is a lot easier than measuring whether someone has a good, creative, robust, and sound thought process.
Right, right. It's I think you're spot on, and I think it's troublesome in where the just education in general, the turn it's taken, because we tend to teach to the test, which I think is absolutely incorrect, because all you're doing is teaching people to and then not again train the knowledge, not really think. And I've come across, these things pop up occasionally on, one of my news feeds or whatever is, you find a test for an eighth grader from like 1900 versus today. And the dramatic difference in the ability you have to really think. I go through some of these things and I'm like, this is really hard. And I know there's not a single eighth grader out there today can actually answer these things, but it really required you to think,
Yeah.
really, really, really think. And I feel like a lot of that's been lost today. That natural ability to just be deeply inquisitive and think, and not just, okay, I gotta read this, I gotta memorize this, and I just gotta regurgitate it tomorrow, and then I can punt it from my brain.
So I 100% agree. I'd love to go look up some of those tests from 100 years ago, 200 years ago. I bet it's fascinating. As you were saying that, the other thing that popped in my mind was going back again to these historical books about historical journeys and expeditions. Many of them have published letters home that were posted by these
Yeah.
explorers. And it really reinforces, like, letter writing was more than just a way of communication. You read these letters and you're like, oh boy, this is flowery language. But like, you go deeper.
Yeah.
And what was happening in these letters? People were reflecting on their experiences, reflecting on their life. There was thinking
Hmm.
happening. And
Yeah.
I would argue that when we stopped writing letters in that traditional sense and
Yep.
started sending greeting cards and texts and e-cards, like, there's a loss of introspection and reflection and thinking there.
Absolutely. Oh, I couldn't agree with you more on that. Like I've always been fascinated by the letter writing culture. Haven't I still, you don't notice. Some people around me know this, but I've written letters almost my entire life.
Oh, I
Like
didn't
I
know
have this,
that.
I
Interesting.
always do. I don't send cards to people. I write letters.
Right.
For the most part, I will 95% of the time I will write a letter. And I have since I was from as young as I can remember, only because I find joy in writing a letter to a person for a number of reasons. One, it's just the fact that you can see my handwriting. There's an aspect you don't see. It's me putting my thoughts down, knowing I spent the time to do it, all that kind of stuff. But like you said, it's, I'm describing a lot more. I'm building a picture. I'm writing a story. I'm explaining what's going on around me while I'm doing this. And I think that has been lost. And that I find troubling because so much knowledge about what's going on in the world at that time, and so many people how do we learn about the past? Very often we learn it through letters.
Yeah. And in fact, if anyone is interested in letters, one of the books I just read, I'll give an unsolicited plug for it. Eric Larson, who I think writes some of the best historical novels out there, best research novels out there, um, released one earlier this year called The Demon of Unrest, and it's about the entire novel's about, or it's not a novel, I'm sorry, it's a historical book. It is about the lead up to the Civil War, and it extensively relies on letters from various politicians, soldiers, and Lincoln himself. And it's just wild when you see the depth of thought and reflection and meaning that goes into the way people composed letters. Like,
It's the depth of thought and reflection, and it's also the quality of their writing is just unbelievable. It's just an average person writes incredibly well versus I feel like today when most can't write at all.
and
Um,
and if you
it's
collected all the letters, all the notes and emails and texts that I've sent in my life, you would not have any real meaningful insight into my soul, my spirit, my thought, who I am, right? It would, like, it'd be like, you'd know what I had for breakfast, you know what time I was going to arrive in Phoenix, but you
exactly
wouldn't know what I was thinking about the world.
exactly, which is why I think letter writing is. I don't know how we went off on this tangent. I'm glad we did, but it's a
Yeah.
good tangent.
But
But
it is
it's true.
relevant because it ties to like this idea that we have to figure out what are the most essential skills. And maybe the gift of AI is that it will let us reorient our brains and the way we teach people to use our brains onto the essential skills and spend less of our brain retaining facts and more of our brain thinking about how to think, thinking about how to learn, and I don't know
I
what it,
hope.
I
No,
hope
I
so.
think you nailed it. I hope you're right. I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned by all of this. And if society as a whole is smart enough to, and again, get away from just the little short sound bites of AI influencers and really looks at what is being created and the power of the tools getting created and use it to reorient one, how we educate, how we think, we can really use these tools to dramatically alter our society in extraordinarily positive ways if we're smart and we recognize that. And we don't just let things happen and then deal with the consequences of what's happening, which is kind of what we're doing now.
So here's my manifesto. As I was thinking about this topic in preparation for this chat today, I was taking some notes and I wrote down a funny phrase. I wrote down "bring back mystery." And what I meant by that is sometimes not knowing something is powerful.
Yes.
Sometimes not having ready access to the answer is actually really powerful. Sometimes it's like the process of thinking about something and conjecturing and working through it yourself is so powerful. Even if the answer is wrong, even if you don't come up with the right answer, you're learning something because you're actually stopping to try to figure it out. And my dad sometimes I'd ask my dad a question when I was a kid, and he would say in a very supportive way, figure it out. Like, think about it first. Come back and ask me after you've thought about it for a while.
Well, and he's enhancing. Look, the brain is a muscle. You have to use the brain. And if you don't use the brain, like anything else, it's going to atrophy. And I think, it's critical. And I think so many look, we have a lot of tools that make life a lot easier for us. And I think and the consequences are we don't use our brain as much, I think, as we've used it before. We use it for different things, but you're atrophying the cognitive capabilities of your brain. And that to me is the frightening part of it. Um, it's you have to use your brain always. And I think, like you said, to me, the joy of solving a problem, right or wrong, or going down 14 different pathways and coming to an answer, right or wrong, look, just I learned so much by doing that process when I try to
Yeah,
solve a hard
yeah,
problem,
yep,
and yes, I know what works, what doesn't work, what can I apply that to something else, but the joy I get in that is just, I can't put words to that.
yeah. One of my most formative experiences, like I remember this like it was yesterday. So it's the 1980s. I think it was it's probably 1980 or very early in the days of computers as we know them.
Yep.
I'd learned to program. This was, learning coding and programming was not something like I was very fortunate that I had access to a computer at that age. Most people didn't. Not just kids, most grown-ups didn't. Like, it was a
Oh,
very new field. And I'd learned basic coding literally in the basic language because that was what was available at the time.
available.
It could be assembly or basic. And I learned basic first. And I was learning a little bit about data structures, and I just learned about arrays. And I remember thinking about, yeah, but how could you make this better? Like, what if I don't want to have to keep resorting and reorganizing my array to insert new things in this list of things and whatever? And I came up with this idea on my own. Literally, it's like, oh, and I had this idea of like how you could use arrays and something else to make it more efficient to like add new things or rearrange things and connect things. And I was all excited. And then eventually I learned that what I had invented in my own head already existed. It was the concept of linked lists, which is one of the very
Yeah.
fundamental ways of organizing data in a computer system. A lot of databases are kind of built on the whole premise behind linked lists,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And it was funny because like I wasn't bummed that someone had already come up with this idea.
Quite
I was
happy.
actually excited that I had somehow, through just thinking about
Uh-huh.
it for a long time, had arrived at what was already a reasonable answer. And
No.
it still sticks with me because it gave me like I learned to trust that you can figure stuff out.
Right.
And it doesn't matter if someone's already solved the problem because I got to the same answer on my own. And I've
No.
always remembered that feeling of like, I solved a problem.
You solved it independently, which to me has
Right.
always been a powerful thing.
Yeah.
And I know it's like you said, when it's been great joy when that's occurred. It's like, wow, I actually figured
Yeah.
out something hard that somebody else spent a lot of time working on, and I figured it out independently of them. And that to me is, I don't know, I always got enormous joy out of that. That to me was like one of the most incredible things you could do.
So that's why I say bring back mystery. Bring back the idea of don't go look for the answer right away. Try to figure it out yourself. And we need to because that exercises the muscle of your brain that is in turn essential for what we just described as the skills that one really needs to have in this world, which are thinking, problem solving, reasoning skills.
Yes.
So, like,
Yeah.
use AI to do basic fact finding, but figure out where you should actually do human problem solving and make a good choice, I guess, between where do I just want to go fact finding and use AI to get an answer versus where is it beneficial to me to actually think about and try to solve a problem.
I agree with everything you're saying. I think you're 110% correct. I think the reality of life in general and the pressure to do more faster, it always going to intrude on this. And I think that's kind of something that you have to work hard to push back on. Doing more
Yeah,
faster is not always the answer. Especially in enterprises and organizations where, it's always about, oh, I need this yesterday. I need it yesterday. I need to be, you can't do this. What does that do? That drives intellectual laziness because you just don't have time to think. You're not thinking strategically.
yeah.
You're thinking very short term. And you know as well as I do, so many organizations are wired this way.
I, one of my real frustrations about the use of AI in companies or what many companies have as a goal. So I've had lots of people ask me and some of our clients asking, so what kind of productivity increases should I see when I roll out these tools to people? And they're thinking about it in terms of, can I have fewer people or can I give them more work, right? The benefit of using AI to me, it's not to do more work. You might sometimes do a little more work, but that's missing the boat. The benefit of AI is to more quickly dispatch with the low value work so I can spend more time thinking, more
Absolutely.
time learning. Give me time back to use my brain in the way I should be using it. Not get more productivity out of me, but let me think more.
Right. No, I agree. I agree. And I look, not to say we're perfect, not perfect, but I certainly try to use it that way. Um, you know, Freeing it up to think about things I otherwise wouldn't be able to think about. And to me, that's important. I don't want to lose my ability to think. I think it's one of the joys of life, being able to think and think hard. Um, and I know it's a muscle that constantly have to use, otherwise it gets weak. And I don't want to lose that ability ever.
Yeah. Well, I think you've nailed it. It's the joy of thinking, the benefit of thinking, the creativity behind it. This is what we have to strive to protect in the world of AI. And I think part of that is look, leaders in organizations have a responsibility to be very thoughtful about how they set the objectives and the success criteria of
Right.
their AI work. If they are focused only on productivity increases, I think they will have a negative impact on the organization in the long run. They need to balance
Absolutely.
that with thinking about, how do I use these tools to help my people be better thinkers?
I and I think you hit a very important point, and it is balancing the short with the long term. And I think most orgs don't do that particularly well, for a variety of reasons. And that's absolutely critical. And it's thinking about, if I do it this way, what am I losing on the long term side of this?
Fantastic. I love this topic.
Yes,
Um, it's been a great, at least for me,
this was a
very
great
interesting
discussion.
conversation. I hope it's been thought provoking to anyone who's listening to this or watching this. I'm super curious about this. So I would love people's thoughts. Like, is there real value in thinking, or is thinking obsolete? Should we bring back mystery? Should we make people pay more attention to solving problems independently? Like, what would you do?
You know what's really interesting here? Look, when this is all done and produced, honestly, I would love educators to look at this and tell me their thoughts. Tell us their thoughts, because I think I'd really love their perspective on what we said here, because how, they're on the front lines of this on a regular basis with students, and that, or we find a professor or a series of professors and we bring them on along with us, and just to opine on this, because I think this is so important of a topic to really be discussing.
So we've talked before, and I think we absolutely need to do this, about the idea of having some students and some educators on the
Yes.
podcast to talk about the use of AI in learning, and the pros and cons. And I think that will be a great discussion. We definitely have to do
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, because again, you and I come back to education every single podcast. We talk about education.
If you'd told me when we started this whole adventure that we'd be talking and thinking as much about the role of education, I would have said, no, we're talking about
Crazy.
technology here, right? Like,
I would have said you
I
were crazy.
started this thinking we were talking about technology, and here we are
Yeah.
once again talking about philosophy, education, human nature, and these other abstract concepts. It's
It's
wild.
funny actually how I think this comes with age and wisdom. Give me a little bit of wisdom here.
Hi, I'm
Sounding like our
age, he's
grandparents.
wisdom.
Sounding like our
um,
grandparents did. When I walked up the hill 2 ways to school, I can, in the
yeah,
snow.
uphill both ways through the snow. We'll see how it all turns out. See you next week.
I will see you next week, David. As always, it's an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, thank you for joining us on Call Me Data.
Have a great day, everybody.
Thanks for watching Call Me Data. If you enjoyed our podcast, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to us on YouTube, and make sure to stay up to date with us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify.